In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and the Holy Spirit. My soul proclaims the greatness of the Lord. My spirit rejoices in God my Savior. For he has looked with favor on his lowly servant. From this day all generations will call me blessed. The Almighty has done great things for me, and holy is his name. He has mercy on those who fear him in every generation. He has shown the strength of his arm. He has scattered the proud in their conceit. He has cast down the mighty from the thrones and has lifted up the lowly. He has filled the hungry with good things, and the rich he has sent away empty. He has come to the help of his servant Israel, for he has remembered his promise of mercy, the promise he made to our fathers, to Abraham and his children forever. Glory be to the Father, to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit, as it was in the beginning, is now, world without end. Amen. So I tell you what, why don't we start by first introducing yourself to the people at your table. And Patty, could you do me a favor? The people behind you, I'm guessing they're coming to the baptismal prep class. Could you help them? All right, so this talk tonight is going to be Paleolithic and Neolithic spirituality, which I know is very nerdy, but during the summertime I like odd topics, and I love this one. And it really came up because I think it was last year, actually. Last semester? I forget. I visit all the RE class and St. Ignatius kids, and for some reason in a street, they're all asking the same questions. Like, well, what religion were the cavemen? And so, are you guys looking for the baptismal prep class? It's right down that hall. So they'd say, well, what religion was a caveman? I said, first of all, there were no cavemen. That's called Paleolithic. And you know, I tell you, some of these second graders, their vocabulary is terrible. They kept saying cavemen, but I let it go because I'm easygoing. But like, it is an interesting question. What about caveman times? Well, there's no caveman times. There's the Stone Age, the Iron Age, and the Bronze Age. And then the Stone Age is divided into three categories. Paleolithic, which just means old Stone Age. Mesolithic, which means middle, and Neolithic, which means new Stone Age. And that's because the instruments were used out of stones. And so anyhow, I just kind of want to cover a class in this because I actually love the origins and the roots of religion. And the whole point is going to be, wow, from the beginning, religion has always been part of man's life. And even if you go back farther, to Neolithic, the Neanderthals, they were not Homo sapiens. We're not descended from the Neanderthals. That's two different branches. But Neanderthals, oddly enough, were very similar to us. They were slightly shorter and stronger bones, more muscular. But you know, the typical image of a Neanderthal as kind of being ape-like and grunting, that's actually completely wrong. The French archaeologist at first unearthed it. He actually unearthed a very old Neanderthal who was suffering from arthritis. So it'd be like us, finding a 90-year-old person saying, oh, this is what all Homo sapiens were like. Actually, they've discovered that Neanderthals, if you dressed them up in a business suit, except for the ridge, you really would have a hard time distinguishing them from us. We had actually the same brain capacity, brain matter. We just have more frontal cortex. So the thought is that we have greater computing power, but they had the same mass of brain. Instead of having it in the frontal cortex, they had what's called this occipital lobe. Now, we don't know what that abilities gave them. A little bit of gray matter more in the front made us far more thinking. They were stronger and faster than us. I don't know what more the occipital, nobody knows what more brain matter in the back would do. But here's the really odd part. So They were the ones who actually did live in caves. We did not. But what's amazing is that we found burial sites of Neanderthals. And to me, this speaks about religion, because their burial sites are consistently the same. The Neanderthals buried their dead in a fetal position with the right hand tucked under their head. And these are graves from France to Iraq. Oddly enough, always the same. And if it was a child, they put a ring of goat's horns around it. But interestingly enough, and they do soil samples it's amazing what they can do from soil samples. They can tell what was in the soil, all this amazing stuff. And in a Neanderthal grave, they took pine boughs and weaved it with 3 flowers, horsetail, hibiscus, and something else, but 3 medicinal flowers. Always the same flowers, woven together. And not only that, but they had this whole kind of ceremony over it. Now, doesn't that just strike you as amazing that they had complicated funeral rituals? They just didn't abandon the body. And like in this one place, the Shamnar Cave, it's in Iraq, they found these Neanderthal burial sites. And one of them was this 40-year-old male who, and this is the amazing part, his shoulder and his arm, the bones in it were not developed, and he was missing a hand. So think about this. He was handicapped. And they gave him a burial. Now, Hobbes' idea that primitive society was, quote, short, nasty, and short, Brutus, and nasty. Something like that. Google it. No, but you look at all the movies, right? Primitive society is harsh. Actually, even with the Neanderthals, there's no way he could have survived on his own. The community took care of him. And they gave him this burial. And the burial, to me, is absolutely fascinating, because they use this red ochre. It's made with iron, so it's a bright red. And they painted him, they put him in the prone position, they encircled him with flowers, and then they put dirt on top. On top of the dirt, they built a fire. And on the fire, they had a feast around him, over his grave. And then they threw dirt on top of the fire. They can tell whether a fire was put out by dirt. Now, that's an amazing ritual that they surrounded by flowers and meal and fire. And that's just the Neanderthals. So I just find it, go ahead. Gives me time to have a little of this.
I guess Smithsonian Magazine, and they had, I think the last issue was an article about the intelligence of Neanderthals and how they actually painted, and they're finding their paintings and so on in France, and then it's a whole different outlook of what Neanderthals.
Yeah, isn't that I didn't see that article, but like clearly they were very artistic to weave these flowers. That's anyhow. But so my only point being is like, wow, even Neanderthals had rituals, and rituals bespeak a religion. If it's so consistent over a wide area, that bespeaks religion. Now about humans, I know this is just the Bible. So you have Adam and Eve, but then you also have their descendants. And it's said about their descendants that this is for early man, that they called on the name of God. So even the Bible, it describes early man as calling on, actually what it says is the name Yahweh, which is a little inconsistent since Yahweh's name is not going to be revealed until Abraham. But it just bespeaks that, well, even early man had a spirituality. And so that's just the Bible. Oh, your wife's here. Right.
Yeah, she's here.
No, somewhere over there, I thought. No, that's not what I was thinking. But anyhow, So about Paleo Man, uh, the Paleolithic time was the longest period in human history. Granted, we have no written records because writing is a new invention, but and publishing is very new. But we do have archaeological evidence, and early human beings were nomadic hunters. So that kind of the same way the American Indians lived, that's what we lived. We didn't live in caves. We did have stone tools and leather. There was fishing tools and rafts. They cooked with fire, which gave us a greater brain capacity. And geographically, Paleolithic man lived along the seashore. We did a lot of fishing. And oddly enough, they found Paleolithic man had strong bones and good teeth. They were as healthy as us. Industrialized human beings, actually, the health went down. Just this. This is my theory. This is just my theory, but I come up with a lot of strange theories. Unlike other primates, we have a subcutaneous layer of fat. So, you know how you can stretch the skin on a dog? We're more like dolphins. Does that make any sense? So I actually think this idea that, because they know Paleolithic man kept near the shores, I think that we grew up near the water because we have, like dolphins, a subcutaneous layer of fat. But they're hunter and gatherers. And the first ingredients of religion, I'm going to say, is storytelling. Because hunting and gathering societies have a free time to tell stories. That's what they did. And even when I was a missionary in South America once, some nuns and I went on this paseo, and paseo was kind of a picnic out with these, they're really peasants, campesinos. And they're illiterate, they're peasants, and we're under the stars, and they could just recite poetry, just making it up. And I was stunned, and the nuns said, yeah, the odd part is, even though they're illiterate, they're poetic and storytelling. Paleolithic man, hunter and gathering society, they would have enjoyed really more abundance of leisure time than the Neolithic farmer, or even us. Close-knit community, but just the power of storytelling. There's a Jewish saying that says words create worlds. Or if you read the story of Helen Keller, when her teacher put her hands underwater and kept signing water, she tells that was her first word. And she said language became the way that she could see the world. And I like reading, I love learning, but haven't you ever been reading, and when you're reading a story, I hear a voice that's not my own. When you get really involved in it, to me, that's wisdom. And so for the first ingredients of religion, if you think about it, Paleolithic man would be, nature and community. They live close to nature. And storytelling. So religion is a way of seeing the world. The same way language helped Helen Keller see the world. Stories unite us together, and they did this study I guess Neanderthals could only exist in very small groups. But with the power of story, you can unite people with an idea. So one of the reasons why we survived is they were stronger and faster. But just with the power of story, we can unite together. And then the Paleolithic home was really not a place. They were nomadic. It wasn't a place, it was a community. So home wouldn't be defined as four walls, but the community that you lived in from month to month, even though they'd travel around. And if you think about human beings, we are the most highly evolved social species. After us is elephants and dolphins. But you can't take a dolphin and just release it into the ocean. It just freaks out. It has to be in a community. Human beings need a tribe, the same way dolphins do, the way bees do.
And with loneliness on the rise, like you could be in a community and be completely lonely. You could be in Times Square and still be all alone. Paleolithic man, in one sense, they were in it together. You had this community. You were in it together. So you survived as a community. So community was a home. Now their homes, oddly enough, were circles. I know that sounds kind of strange, but their structure was not square like ours. It was circles. Whether it was Paleolithic men in wherever, they always lived in circles. Either these grass type things I saw that was in Britain, or teepee-like structures. It's always circles. So they also studied primitive societies, and one of their major things was practicing gratitude. When you take a kill, before you would eat the animal, you would say gratitude. And I just like this idea of community and nature and storytelling. And not only that, but art. Paleolithic man was really very artistic. So, oh, I didn't want that one. Although she's a beauty. She really is. So these are some of the cave art. And just to explain, it was first discovered in France, but actually there's like 350 caves just in Europe. It's not showing up well, but the dark ones are bright. It's an ochre, so it's bright red and yellow and black. And you have all this artwork. And the first one I kind of think is kind of funny because the scientist was searching for, Paleolithic man. And he knew in these caves there's probably some remnants. So he's smart there, and he went and checked it out, couldn't find anything. He was going back to check it out again. For some reason, he couldn't get rid of his daughter, couldn't babysit her or something. So he just brought his daughter along, and he put torches. And he's looking at the ground, trying to find evidence. And her daughter looks up and says, "Mira, oxen." And she looks up, and this is what she sees. And so in these caves, they've discovered these caves with all this great artwork. It's not really showing up well in this picture, but my point is that it's quite artistic. Here's another one. There's a man there with a torch. Look at that. It looks like a Chinese horse. It is so beautiful to me. Oxen. And I'll show you a couple more. The other thing that's amazing is that in these caves, like this part is sticking out. In the caves, they also found these stone torches and torches. So there's these cavernous caves with these architecture, but like with this part sticking out, they made it the shoulder of a bull. So like they took the formation contours of the cave, and where there's a natural bulge, they worked it into the animal so that when you're walking around with a torch, it looks like the animals are moving with the shadows. And it's just, to me, absolutely brilliant. Now, the odd part is, when they found the first cave, it was a big deal. Even the King of France came and checked it out. But they soon thought it was all staged and fake, because they couldn't believe that primitive man could be that artistic. And so they, actually, of course, that got disproven. And the little girl that said, "Mira," later as an old lady, this one guy who was the major critic apologized to her. He just couldn't believe that such artwork could be done by primitive society. I'll show you just a couple more because I think it's amazing. So once again, oxen. I just think they're absolutely beautiful. The other thing is, whatever these caves were used for, they found like bone flutes and xylophones and drums, and they were chosen for their sound quality as well. That it had an echo effect. Now, the amazing part is, so many of these caves, nobody actually lived in the caves. The caves seem to be used for ritual. There's all this artwork on the ceiling, and there's 32 symbols that they found in all these caves. And these caves were not just used for a couple years. These caves were used for thousands of years. These nomadic tribes would come back to these caves and use them for ritual. Now, the colors are all either red, yellow, or black, because that's the only colors. Humans aren't going to be able to make the color blue for several thousand more years. But in these 350 caves scattered from Europe to Asia Minor, there's also 32 symbols that expand a 30,000 timeline. You have these handprints. That's going to be important. The handprints are not adults, but actually adolescents. So they have these handprints that were made on by blowing the ochre on it. These are the 32 symbols. We really don't know what the 32 symbols mean, but clearly it's the oldest form of graphic communication, probably more hieroglyphics. The first really written language is going to be cuneiform by the Sumerians. But what were these caves used for? And one more thing. So you have this art. So we know they had meals, they had torches. Also, in these caves, it wasn't art for art's sake. It was art for worship. Because there's this thing called, I should look it up anyhow, where you study primitive societies to tell what is similar. And the odd part is, if you look, whether it's Chilean or Greek, you have this common thing on primitive societies of initiation rites, all involving caves. And caves are kind of like this rebirth. When you come out of a cave, you're born again. It's called ethnographic parallelisms. So it's studying common parallels among primitive society. Gratitude is one, but also initiation rites. All primitive societies had initiation rites. And so imagine you would pass through this portal of light and darkness and enter the subterranean world. Oh, come on in. Are you here for the baptismal prep class?
Safe environment.
Oh, that's still down there.
All right.
No, that's okay. I just hate for somebody to think this is a safe environment. I don't know. They talked about caves a lot. Are you guys here for a safe environment? No, right down there. Okay, so among these animals, they discovered that a lot of the animals have tapping on them. So, I'll go back here. The animals had, because they're used for thousands of years, tapping on them. And it wasn't target practice. I know that sounds kind of strange, but like all the animals seem to be hunting animals as well. So they're not using it for target practice, but it was used as part of some sort of ritual. There's one where a spear is actually taking down an oxen, a bull. And the spear, the cave actually, they have, oh gosh, I'm forgetting what it's, Attalus, where it makes the spear go twice as far. We studied them in grade school. Twice as far and twice as fast. So most likely, like most primitive societies, these caves were a place where you, for initiation rites, to move a child from self-centered living into part of a community. And what they found is that as a child, all your needs are taken care for, right? You're fed, you're cared for, you didn't have much responsibility. And a child can think it's enormously important because everything's centered around them, and that's the way it should be. But a whole society composed of human beings where everything revolves around them is doomed. So in primitive societies, they all had initiation rites. It prevented them from turning into LA. But like, so there's always these rituals in primitive society, frequently with caves, like in Greece or Chile, where it symbolizes a rebirth, where you're no longer a child. We really don't have that except for maybe confirmation. So the conclusion is the artwork. It's not just art for art's sake. You have this constellation of cathedrals, of echoing chambers, and music, and ritual, and even like, this sounds kind of strange, they noticed, one archaeologist, she was a woman, she was pretty brilliant, she noticed that on the walls, one side were males and one side were females, which bespeaks about, choosing a side, separation. Some of the bison were actually giving birth. So most likely they were chosen for initiation. But even like in the Christian religion, you have Christ coming out of the tomb as a symbol of rebirth. But not only initiation, but we also have many of the artworks have pictures of shamans. The only human beings that show up in these cave paintings are shamans. Shamans dress as, shamans don't dress as hunters. They dress as an animal. And so, like the word shaman is Russian. This is one that actually is they found from Russia. But, and I just chose it because it's more clear. But the shaman is dressed up with antlers. He has a drum. In many of these caves, they found drums and rattles. One of them was the rattle was made with a tortoise shell. But he's not dressed as a hunter. And he has special clothing and a special headdress, dancing. In the caves, they found it either as a deer, a bison, or a bird. Birds were very rare. But going into the cave is like going into the spirit world. So you have these shamans, and the odd part is that for primitive society, there was really no specialized work. We pretty much hunted and moved together. Being a shaman would be the first specialized work. And that means that even primitive man, they had religious leaders. If you notice, like the headdress of the antlers or dressing like a deer, have you ever seen Native American pictures of a medicine man where he's actually wearing the buffalo? It's very common to this, and music and dancing, but it's a specialized vocation with headdress and dancing. So unlike Neolithic human beings, Paleolithics, this was specialized work. And shamans are really pretty rare today. I gave a homily about one of my favorite shamans. His name was Bull Lodge, the last American one. It really deals with spirituality. But if you study shamanism, even among the American Indians, it does fit the same pattern of what's being pictured in these caves. Or there's another movie, it was actually made by this 18-year-old, and it was this primitive tribe in Africa. I can't remember the name, but it has the in the name. And they're hunting and gathering society. And they did this 4-day journey with the hunters where they shot a giraffe and they made the poison out of this like kind of grub worm, and they shot it, and they don't run down the animals. We're not built for speed. I certainly am not. We're built for endurance. We're wear the animal out. So it's this 4-day trek of following the giraffe, and at one point they lose the giraffe, and so they can't figure out which direction it's gone. So the shaman goes into this trance of chanting, and he takes his bow as an instrument, and he starts chanting, and he says it's that way, and they did find it. So early man had shamans. That's a religious order. I think it's absolutely amazing. The other odd part is in these caves, outside the caves, they found burials. And when they found burials, human burials, it was with rock art and jewelry and this small figurine, I should say. So Paleolithic human beings did not have extravagant evidence that the Neanderthals did, but we did bury people with jewelry and with having a feast. So you still have kind of that today in any funeral, where we have flowers and feasting. And the fact that they buried them with things meant they must believed in some sort of afterlife. They're buried many times outside these caves. And the figurine that they were buried with is called, it's called Venus. It's also called the Mother Goddess. If I can find it. Oh,
She was right at the beginning.
that was the first one. There she is. There she is. She's a plump girl. But it's not a seductive photo. Now, Neolithic man will put a skirt on her, but she has braided hair. You never see a face on her either. She's faceless. But her feet come to a point. Why do they come to a point? They only come to a point in Paleolithic times. And that's because that's where they stuck it in the ground where somebody died. Now, later in Mesolithic times, they're going to find this relief of her where she's carved. You know what a relief is, where it's like, imagine this is a stone wall. Part of it's coming out, so it's not quite a statue, it's a relief of the Mother Goddess. And there she had 13 moons on her. Now, why 13 moons? Well, the moon has 13 phases, and most primitive societies, they work by a lunar calendar. It's actually a little bit more accurate than the solar calendar. Even ancient Judaism works by a lunar calendar. So when it said Mary was in her 7th month of pregnancy, it's a 7th month of pregnancy and a 10-month pregnancy. So even the Jewish calendar, sometimes it won't make sense to us because it works off a lunar calendar, and in the Bible, all major events happen at night. Now, what's odd is that they didn't find any evidence of war. But that would be hard because metal weapons haven't been invented yet. But there's no evidence of mass murder. There's evidence of murder, but not of mass murder. Like we found that Ice Age man, he was murdered. But what you do find lasting evidence is art and architecture and worship and music. So maybe it wasn't that brutal of a society. And my conclusion is this. In the beginning was religion. We survived because of religion. We employed art and story in religion to unite us together. That was our great advantage. Religion gave us an EQ, a purpose. So in the beginning there were caves, these ancient cathedrals of art and music and ritual. In the beginning was ritual for the dead. In the beginning was one divine image, the mother image. In the beginning there was religion. And like part of me, so I'm going to pause here for a sec, but just so, like I think death and gratitude and community, those were pathways that urged religion. So why? What's the meaning you can gather out of this? Why not a more complicated religion? Well, my first point is in the book C.S. Lewis wrote called Until They Have Faces. Anybody read that book? Story? Okay. Well, it's based off this Greek myth of Cupid and his wife, where Cupid falls in love, but he only visits his wife at night. And she talks to her sister, and her sister say, well, he must be hideous, he must be ugly. Maybe you're not really married. Maybe it's nobody ever shows up. And so they talk her into lighting an oil lamp and looking at his face. And she lights a lamp, and as he's sleeping, she sees Cupid. But a drop of oil hits him, he awakes, and
he goes into the speech, now you've ruined everything. Now it will be years before we can be together. And he said, it's not that I didn't have a face, you didn't have a face. What I was teaching you was a language. And the point of that story is this. The divine is teaching us a language to communicate back. It's not the divine that lacks a language, it's us. So maybe God took centuries to develop a religious language in human beings using art and community. Does that make sense? Like, it's not that God can't communicate to us, we just don't have a face, a way of communicating back. So starting with Paleolithic times, what you find is through gratitude and death, we're developing a language. Religion will look a little bit different under Neolithic times, but starts with Paleolithic. Even Christ, when Christ comes, Christ says that he didn't come to change the law, but fulfill the law, to change how we interpret the law. But the law first gave us a language, and then what Jesus does is he changes the interpretation of language, the storytelling about it. So that's kind of one. Two, my second point is this. Oftentimes people say, well, religion is invented by human beings. I would say, well, if you look at the evidence, religion was part of what it means to be a human being right from the beginning. We had religious practices. And so my third is, I know that this is petty, but people who say, well, I'm spiritual but not religious, you wouldn't be able to survive for thousands of years unless you belong to a community that was solidified by a way of life and maturity. So if you're just spiritual but not religious, you're not going to survive that time period. That's my only thing. So reactions, rebuttals, it's some of it's supposition. Yeah, I only vaguely remember that. The only thing I don't like about that is that I know it's popular to say the beginning of human being life was brutish and terrible, and God knows chimpanzees are. You know, if you want to learn about cruelty, chimpanzees, I like to think I'm more of a bonobo, just a celibate one. I love love. Bonobos are lovers. But my only point being is that you don't really find brutality in Paleolithic times. But I will agree with this. A lot of people might not know this, and this sounds strange, but this is actually Catholic theology. When did God come into the evolutionary process? We'd say he's always been a part of it. Always been a part of it. And it doesn't say God scooped up humanity, human beings, and they're made just like that. It just said God scooped up and made us from the earth. Well, that could be through stages. Nobody really knows. But this is the other part, and this is the key part. So like St. Irenaeus speaks about this, it's actually hidden in our creed that this thought is if Adam and Eve never ate from the tree of good and knowledge, would Christ still have come? Yes. Yes. Eating from the tree of good knowledge brought about the cross. But either way, Christ would have come. Because in the Genesis story, like in the garden, it's a garden of not yet. That's a strange phrase. It's a garden of potentiality. So yes, we are created human beings, but God, even in the story of Adam and Eve, clearly is not done developing us. And Christ would have had to come at one time when we had the language for Christ. That's like what St. Irenaeus. St. Irenaeus is one. His spiritual mentor was a follower of John the Apostle, but I like that St. Irenaeus early church idea. No, Christ would have always come. Christ came to make us mature human beings. And Christ came in the fullness of time when we had a religious language to reply back. All right, moving on to Neolithic times, if you guys don't mind, because I got to work tomorrow. Neolithic times. So Neolithic times, you know what the big revolution, and this was the biggest revolution in human history, was farming. So 10,000 years ago,
what developed was the agricultural revolution. Farming produced the Neolithic revolution, which includes using wild and domestic crops and domesticating animals. And interestingly enough, 9,400 years ago in Jordan, in this one discovery, they discovered this fig from 9,400 years ago. And the fig cannot be pollinated by insects. It's the first example of cultivized farming was figs. Now, so farming changed human beings tremendously. A couple things that it did. It gave us a regular food supply. It also created food storage. So it's in Neolithic times that pottery is developed. Pottery is good for a settled life, not for a nomadic life. And human beings then built granaries. We become good at pyrotechnics. The homes of Neolithic men, if you're wondering what this is, it's an archaeological site. It was the first one discovered. I think it's just amazing. It's this archaeological site of this Neolithic compound. I'll talk about it more in a second. But you can kind of see what their homes were like in that picture. So here's an artist's rendition of what it would have been like. So basically, it looks like adobe living. So they built granaries, pyrotechnics inside their homes. They actually discovered these pictures. They painted on the plaster, once again using red and yellow ochre, but bulls, people dancing with bulls. But farming also allows for a population explosion of human beings, larger families to support the farms. Unlike nomadic people, the population can only grow so big. But with farming and the food supply, you could have large families and work. Also, with farming, because of the population explosion, that's when you have this migration into Europe and other places. So you also have specialized work. You have the beginning of science, the manipulation of environment. Human beings keep expanding, and we expand past the Bosphorus. You know that little connection between Asia and Europe? That thin little bridge. There's a bridge that goes over it if you ever go to Turkey, connects east and west. At one time, that was a landmass. And this very famous archaeologist, Bill Ryan, he's the one who discovered these adobe homes. And he noticed this transition from adobe homes into longhouses made of wood. But he also had this theory that, and he has evidence behind it, that, you know, the Great Flood? The Great Flood is a myth that is in not all, but most human cultures. Most religions all have this Great Flood. And he said it was probably when the Bosphorus, the wall fell in, and he had all this water from the ocean flooding into the Black Sea. Because in the Bible it says the water came up out of the ground for the flood. Not just rain, but coming up from the ground. And he discovered through satellites evidence that there are farms once under the Black Sea. I kind of like that, but anyhow. So this compound is 32 acres. 32 acres of these homes. There's no streets. It's wall to wall in big rectangles. And there's no doors on them. Oddly enough, how you exit a home and travel is through the roof, where they have these ladders. And so in the summertime, they would sleep in the house. And in, summertime they'd sleep on the roof. In wintertime, they'd sleep in the house. And the bones that they found of these Neolithic farmers, from the rib cage, they noticed that there was a lot of soot that was collected. So basically, farming is terrible for your health. Sorry about that, Dan. It's terrible for you. But then they move, if you notice, this is the move from circles to squares. In Neolithic times, you'll have these long houses built out of wood for a home, but also cattle. Human beings lived, oddly enough, in this grid community structures now. Forests are starting to be cut down to build these rectangular homes. And also, we'll get into this next time, these huge stone monuments start to be raised in honor of the ancestors, places for the ancestors, and they start to use astrology. Now, what this means is the religion in the cave has ended. So what does religion look like for Neolithic farmers? And this is amazing. This is Chattahoochee. And so what they found is these first adobe walls, bright red frescoes of bulls, people dancing with bulls, all conjoined. And here's the part that was really shocking. So in this community, they have several chapels throughout the community. Now there's homes, but they also have, in various locations, they found chapels. And the chapels were all over the place. And the chapels were a place for the dead. So under the floor of the homes in these chapels, they buried the dead. And they had these benches along the side where in the benches, this is an example. In the benches, even in the benches, there's these benches along the way. They buried the dead. These farmers were planting the dead in their community. They wanted their lives and the dead to be one in one community. Also, bulls are really popular. So they also had these bulls on the wall too, but not only paintings. Then they had an altar. In the center of these chapels, they had an altar. And on the altar, they had bull's horns. What's striking to me about that is that if you ever read the Old Testament, like Abraham goes and he builds a lot of altars when he gets to the promised land, right? But the altars have horns on them. And if you were to say, well, why did ancient Israelites have horns on the altars? You'll read it if you read the Bible. People say, I don't know, they just put horns on. Well, now they discovered these chapels, and all the altars have horns on them. I just think it's the development of religion. But instead of being a place where the dead were buried outside the cave, now they're buried in the homes. And they had these kind of home altars as well, where an altar is used for feasting. So you had this, once again, this nexus between the dead and art, because they painted the walls, and a meal together. And the image of the mother goddess now is found all over the place. In Paleolithic times, they're just found with the dead. Now that there's communities, you have the mother goddess, and it's found all over the place. They put them in the granaries, they put it in their homes, they put it in their chapels. And the mother goddess, it's changed. Before, she was just this plump woman. Now she's a plump woman with braided hair. So you know women in ancient times had braided hair because the mother goddess did. And they put a skirt on her. But also she could be holding like a ram's horn or an elk's horn. But in Neolithic time, the most common image of the mother goddess was holding a child. I just think that's kind of amazing because as a Catholic, when you look, like if you're 40,000 years from now, when people look at Catholic churches, they'll say, well, there was always this image of a woman and a child. Like, I just find that kind of amazing. The other thing, in these chapels, they had this strange symbol up here. It's a human being with his arms raised doing the splits. Not sure why the split. But like just from a Catholic point of view, if you walked in to a church 40,000 years and looking at a Catholic church, you would see always this image of and you know, like even Moses, when Moses prays, his hands are open. It's the most, this is actually, this form, image of prayer is only going to come about when we have knights being knighted. the ancient form of praying is hands open. I just think there's kind of some similarities. I just think it's amazing. So with the, we've got an hour. Next time I'm going to go complete the Neolithic time period with the megalithic structures, which is just like that Stonehenge and New Grange. And Neolithic man was very concerned about the dead. I'll get into that more next time. But reactions about Neolithic man. I know. And the mother goddess, she's not like a thin, waifish Vogue model. It's kind of earthy. Do you like? Yeah. And I just think it's in the. If you take the most primitive divine image that we have, is that of a mother image. It's not a brutal, harsh image of God. I just think that's kind of amazing too.
Well, I was thinking too, that's the first person a baby, a child, a human will bond with.
Yeah.
Is the female.
I always love that line. The first person who gave you, the person who gave you your first kiss is your mother. I don't. Okay, so just a couple things. One, remember